This guy has never been a nice guy. And finally, we're now hearing about how he rages behind the scenes because he's always been this way. Ask anyone who worked with him in the Senate. This has always been the book on Joe Biden. President Joe Biden raging with a blazing fire of a million suns behind the scenes, apparently. You ever notice they all tell us how great and competent and with it and lucid Joe Biden is behind the scenes, and yet you and I, we never actually get to see that Joe Biden in real life. Well, CNN gave us the story over the weekend, and it's worth noting not only about his temper, his raging behind the scenes, but also who he's directing that rage at.
Fury behind closed doors. We have new details this morning about President Biden's angry reaction in a private meeting after the special counsel's report exonerated him of legal wrongdoing, but then put in the report that he wouldn't be charged because he's an elderly man with memory issues. The special counsel wrote on Biden's diminished faculties and memory, and even went on to say that he didn't remember, even within several years, when his son Beau died. The president was livid about this, reportedly, and in a meeting with Democrats in Virginia, lashed out, saying, "How could I effing forget that?" CNN's Caitlin Polantz is following all of the details for us. Caitlin, we saw his emotional response to all of this. And then you have this report that came out that exonerated him, but then threw in this barb about his memory. What else came out in this report?
So a couple quick things here. We need to fact check as we go here, CNN. First of all, who is this reporter? She's having trouble sort of reading the teleprompter. I always get nervous when a broadcast journalist is having trouble literally reading words 5 feet away from them. By the way, just so you know, we don't use a teleprompter here on this show. You're seeing us raw and live. Also, did you hear what she just said? That report that exonerated Joe Biden, the report did not exonerate Joe Biden. Can I be clear with you, please? Don't let your liberal brother-in-law on your Facebook page get away with this crap, or the lib 2 cubicles down from you in the office or hanging out at the coffee machine. Don't let anybody get away with that. Joe Biden was not exonerated by the special prosecutor's report. In fact, he was implicated in the special prosecutor's report. He just got off because the special prosecutor, Mr. Hurd, decided that he was too senile to stand trial, that no jury in the world would convict the dude. That's all. But this tossing around the word exonerated is absolute bull. And we're not going to let him get away with it either. That said, let's get to the raging behind the scenes part.
Well, Sarah, we learned about an episode where Joe Biden did willfully retain and disclose classified materials. That is a core finding of the special counsel report, even though Joe Biden was not going to be charged and is not going to be charged as a sitting president, or even if he were to be a private citizen and not the president of the United States right now. That finding primarily was based around Joe Biden's conversations with his ghostwriter in 2017, that he had handwritten notebooks still in his possession in his private residence. He told the ghostwriter he found all the classified documents downstairs, or found all the classified stuff downstairs. He had kept information from his time as vice president about Afghanistan, the military, foreign policy, and that was something that the ghostwriter should not have been privy to, or that Joe Biden should have had after he left the vice presidency. Now, part of the reasoning that we saw that he is not being charged is that the special counsel found this wasn't a triable case before a jury, and putting in writing that damning assessment, really, politically, saying at trial, Mr. Biden would likely present himself to a jury, as he did during our interview of him, as a sympathetic, well-meaning, elderly man with a poor memory. Sarah, you don't usually see assessments like that from a prosecutor in writing, but you do here because we have the special counsel report in the hands of Congress.
That's right. And also, you don't usually see it because a special prosecutor, most prosecutors out there, set aside the word special, but prosecutors generally don't deliver reports explaining why they don't press charges. If they don't press charges, they just don't press charges, and you walk away. You don't have to put out a 300-page report explaining exactly the crimes that you discovered and why you're not pressing charges. So he was obliged to explain why he was treating Joe Biden different than, say, Donald Trump. And the reason is a scandal. The reason is that we have an incompetent president. And by the way, the secondary scandal, which also deserves some attention, is the fact that this prosecutor acknowledged the fact that in D.C., the system is rigged. The jury pool in the District of Columbia is drawing from people who 90%, 95% votes Democrat. So they all like Joe Biden. They're not going to convict him, but you try being a Republican in Washington, D.C., facing federal charges, you're going to jail. Even if there's no evidence, you're going to jail because of the D.C. jury pool. You can't get a fair trial here. But this whole idea of him raging behind the scenes is critically important to acknowledge, because right after that meeting where he goes in and starts throwing the F-bomb around, how could I effing forget that? It's my son, Beau. Then some genius decided to send Joe Biden out there in front of reporters. And let's not forget what that looked like.
Mr. President, for months when you were asked about your age, you would respond with the words, watch me. Many American people have been watching, and they have expressed concerns about your age.
That is your judgment. That is your judgment. That is not the judgment of the press.
Look at it. He's shouting her down, and he's pointing at her. And that is your dad. Also, did anybody notice that he made, everyone's talking about how he mistaked Egypt for Mexico. But right there, that's your judgment. That's not the judgment of the press. Dude, she is the press. What are you talking about? Well, clearly what he meant was that's not the judgment of the American people, right? I mean, out of all of the mistakes he made that night in his white-hot rage, that's just one of them. It hasn't gotten as much attention, but it's just as imbecilic. But again, the attitude with the finger pointing. And by the way, Mr. President, it is the opinion of the American people. 80% of the American people think that he's not capable of doing the job. Then at that same press conference, still with the memory of this, how would I effing forget when my son died? He raised that issue, and you can see the seething rage gritted through his teeth.
In addition, I know there's some attention paid to some language in the report about my recollection of events. There's even reference that I don't remember when my son died. How in the hell dare he raise that? Frankly, when I was asked the question, I thought to myself, it wasn't any of their damn business. Let me tell you something. Some of you have commented, I wear since the day he died, every single day, the rosary he got from Our Lady of.
All right, never mind the fact that he didn't remember the name of the church. It's Our Lady of Guadalupe, by the way, where his son, Beau, who, of course, he could never possibly forget anything associated with his death, except he forgot the name of the church where he got the rosary. And then this whole idea, I thought to myself, how dare he raise that? We all know who raised it. He raised it. I guarantee you we're not going to see the transcripts. They're never going to let us see the transcripts until 20 years after Joe Biden dies. But I guarantee you, when he was pressed about why he did this and why he did that and why he did this, he threw out there, well, my son just died. My son, Beau, just died. And so, I was really shook up about it and I was still reeling. So I can't be held accountable. He uses it all the time. He constantly raises the death of his son. He lies about it, too, claiming that he died in combat in Iraq. I mean, you can say, wow, hey, Mr. President, it's a nice day out today. Look at that blue sky. Yeah, it reminds me of the day my son died. He was a combat death in Iraq. Right? I mean, he does it all the time. And I guarantee you, he was probably, befuddled by the questions of the special prosecutor. So he did what he always does. He raised the death of Beau to try to deflect. And maybe one of the prosecutors said, well, Mr. President, what we're talking about here is something that happened in 2008. Now, what year did your son die? I don't know. Now, when did Beau die? Right? That's what happened here. And now he's feigning outrage. How dare he? How dare he raise the death of your son? How dare you raise the death of your son at every turn? But you know what Democrats do? They don't let a good opportunity go to waste or a horrible situation go to waste. And we saw that with the Bidens over the weekend. Jill Biden, she's a doctor, Jill Biden put out a fundraising letter on this thing and specifically raised the issue of Beau Biden. I hope you can imagine how it felt to read that attack, not just as Joe's wife, but as Beau's mother. I mean, just a point of clarification. Technically, Dr. Jill is Beau's stepmother. Now, listen, I'm in a mixed family. My wife is my children's stepmother. And generally speaking, they constantly refer to each other in that tense. You know, it's the appropriate factual way to do it. That doesn't mean that my children's stepmother, my wife, has any less love or less affection or less motherly connection to those children. But I find it, in the context of a political fundraising letter, kind of manipulative, considering the fact that there's probably some, well, as Rush Limbaugh referred to them, low information voters out there reading this. And they might appreciate the context a little clearer for Jill Biden to refer to Beau as her stepson and herself as his stepmother. That said, she goes on in the letter, May 30th is a day forever etched in our hearts. It shattered me. It shattered our family. So many of you know that feeling after you lose a loved one, where you feel like you can't get off the floor. What helped me and what helped Joe was to find purpose. And that's what keeps Joe going, serving you and the country we love. Ladies and gentlemen, you're witnessing Jill Biden, the First Lady of the United States, exploiting the death of her stepson to raise money for their political campaign. So spare me the faux outrage, Joe. How dare he bring that up? How dare he? You're using your son to raise money. Gone forever. Thank God now, hopefully, gone forever is this lie, this fake fraudulent notion that Joe is a good old Uncle Joe. Oh, he's just a kindly old guy who comes and hangs out. No, he's been a jerk from day one in the Senate. Go back and look at his speeches on the floor back in the 70s. Go look at when he ran for president and he started shouting at reporters back then. Go back and ask the family of the late Judge Robert Bork what a kindly guy Joe Biden is. Ask Clarence Thomas and his wife and their family about what a kindly guy Joe Biden is. You can ask Mitt Romney, who Joe Biden called a racist when he was running against him in 2012. This guy has never been a nice guy. And finally, we're now hearing about how he rages behind the scenes because he's always been this way. Ask anyone who worked with him in the Senate. This has always been the book on Joe Biden. And that's one thing. Listen, domestically, politically, he's a jerk behind the scenes, whatever. He treats staffers poorly, whatever. I mean, that's the tale as old as time in Washington, D.C. But now this guy is president of the United States. And not only is he quietly raging against his staff, but he's also doing it with our allies. The most concerning story over the weekend with regard to Joe Biden's temper and his out-of-control raging in histrionics had to do with what he apparently is saying about Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is fighting for the survival of his nation, survival of the Israeli people, facing a massacre at the hands of the Hamas terrorists right on his doorstep. Joe Biden from the beginning publicly has been pretending like he supports Israel, but behind the scenes, he's been trying to keep Benjamin Netanyahu from doing his job. He's been trying to keep him from protecting the people of Israel. And now this story breaks over the weekend. Biden disparages Netanyahu in private. How dare he? How dare he disparage a man who is conducting a war protecting his border? Joe Biden should try protecting his border once in a while. And if you scroll down into the article, you'll see very quickly exactly what kind of language he uses for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. In at least 3 recent instances, Biden has called Netanyahu an asshole, according to 3 of the people directly familiar with his comments. He's calling Netanyahu an a-hole. Benjamin Netanyahu, a man who has forgotten more about defending his nation and fighting in a war than Joe Biden will ever know. He calls him an a-hole. I'm sorry. What exactly would Joe Biden have Benjamin Netanyahu do? He is literally facing an existential threat to his entire population and to the existence of his country. And because he's actually waging an effective war, going after terrorists, Joe Biden has the nerve to behind the scenes refer to him like that? What a despicable human being he is. But none of us should be surprised at this. I mean, calling Benjamin Netanyahu an a-hole behind the scenes, lashing out at reporters after the special prosecutor accurately describes his memory loss and his cognitive abilities as being less than able to defend himself in court, therefore obviously less than able to conduct the affairs of our nation. None of this, frankly, should be a surprise to us. Look at how his temper has flared in the past with reporters in press conference for merely asking simple questions that he doesn't feel prepared to answer.
One more, sir. You campaigned and you ran on a return to civility. And I know that you dispute the characterization that you called folks who would oppose those voting bills as being Bull Connor or George Wallace, but you said that they would be sort of in the same camp.
No, I didn't say that. Look what I said. Go back and read what I said and tell me if you think I called anyone who voted on the side of the position taken by Bull Connor that they were Bull Connor. And that is an interesting reading of English. I assume you got in the journalism because you like to write.
So did you expect that would work with Senators Manchin or Sinema?
No, here's the thing. There's certain things that are so consequential. You have to speak from your heart as well as your head.
Look at the rage just behind the eyes, the seething, gritted teeth, the condescension, the patronizing attitude. And by the way, I never said anyone who voted like this with Bull Connor was actually the same as, but actually that's exactly what he does all the time. He's done it with you. If you dare to support Donald Trump, you're a fascist. You're undermining our Constitution. You're undermining our democratic process. You're an enemy of our country, right? MAGA fascists, MAGA extremists, MAGA this, MAGA that. It's what he constantly does. In fact, just last week with regard to Donald Trump, he was screaming and shouting in a rage again. This time, once again, repeating a lie about Donald Trump.
Donald Trump, when he was commander-in-chief, refused to visit a cemetery, U.S. cemetery outside of Paris for fallen American soldiers. And he referred to those heroes, and I quote, as suckers and losers. He actually said that. He said that. How dare he?
Look at him. This is the guy. This is the man. And this is the progression that we've seen over the years. I mean, sure, it was cute and funny when he was challenging voters to push-ups when he was running for office, right? Who dared to challenge him. Remember when he would get in their face and he'd point the finger and he'd start shouting like that? What is going on here? Well, our friends over at the Free Beacon have an idea. They've talked to some doctors, some scientists, some medical personnel, and they've sort of highlighted exactly in this headline what we're seeing before our very eyes. Brain rage. Biden's violent temper, a common symptom of dementia and Alzheimer's. Tantrum so bad, some staffers try to avoid meeting alone with him. I mean, listen, ever since the Tara Reade story, I think that every woman in the White House should avoid meeting alone with him. And frankly, half of the men probably too, considering some of the stories the Secret Service tell about him. The point is, what we're hearing now about his rage behind the scenes is exactly what doctors look for with advanced cases of Alzheimer's. And anybody who has a loved one who suffered from Alzheimer's and dementia, they know this is the case. The temper gets worse and worse and worse. They have a short fuse. It's because they're frustrated because their brains don't work anymore. In any other case, we'd all feel sorry for Joe Biden, except for the fact that he's the president of the United States. And he insists on directing that rage and that anger at you and the candidate that you'd like to vote for instead of Joe Biden. Well, and, of course, to our allies across the seas. Last I checked, it's kind of a faux pas internationally and diplomatically for the president of the United States to call our allies words like asshole. And maybe you should check that once in a while. We wouldn't want him to start World War III, would we?